All right, everybody, welcome to the Jacque Show. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I see in practice almost every single day, and it needs to get attention. So I call this the number one home wrecker. This is mold. So let's get into this today. So whenever we talk about mold, again, I talk about it all of the time. What are just some of the things that you're trying to think about, or what would bring suspicion into your mind if you're like, hey, do I have mold? What is that stuff? What do I have to do about it? Where do I even start? So the way that I always tell my patients, when you're suspicious of mold, here are some of the things that you can use as like a frame of reference to back your notion of whether or not you have mold. Number one is when you come into your house, do you feel sick? I've had patients who they can't even approach their front porch without having sick symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, dizziness before they even enter into their house. Another tangent of that is if you leave, say you go on vacation, you go to Florida or you go to California or wherever else that it is that you're going, and you feel better, and then you come back home and you feel like death again, there's a very strong correlation to your environment being something that may be toxic to you. So this is where we need to dive in. Now, I'll remember this probably till the day I die. I had a patient who was like, you know what? I'm very suspicious that I have mold. Every morning I wake up and it feels like or tastes like a cat took a dump in my mouth. I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, it feels like a cat took a dump in my mouth while I was asleep, and I woke up and feel like you have to scrub your teeth just to make your breath fresh because it just smells so awful. And so there was a question, it's kind of like a survey question I use now with some of my patients that are coming in. I'll throw that question out there. I'll pose that question to them. And it's almost like 90% accurate. 90% of the time, if you have mold in your home, you can feel like you're waking up in the morning and like a cat took a dump in your mouth. I mean, there's not much else I can really say about that. So if that's something that you're feeling when you wake up in the morning, yes, it could be that you're a mouth breather, but it's still, if you're breathing that mold, those mycotoxins in while you're sleeping, they're going to cake in on your mouth, and it's not going to be very good. And on top of that, when we're talking about the mouth, if you consistently have oral thrush where your tongue is just completely white, and it's usually like every time you wake up in the morning, or maybe you have kids and this is something that happens to the kids quite often, then this may also be a sign that you have mold in your home. Just some more, leverage for you, if you will. The other thing too is if you have zero energy in your house, and I'm not talking about just because you've got 37 kids running around, you're working 57 jobs and you don't sleep at night. I'm talking if there's really no stress in your life should be good, but you wake up in the morning and you're just like, oh my gosh, how am I even going to go about the day today? I don't have energy. I don't have drive. I've got no pep in my step. That could also be a sign that we're dealing with mold toxicity. Remember, if you have mold in the home, if you're sleeping on average anywhere from 7 to, we'll say, 9 hours a night, if you're spending that much time in a given environment, that means you're being exposed for that many hours. So it's a very strong possibility that one of the things that you are feeling, the reason why you're feeling so exhausted is because you were breathing in mold throughout the night. Okay? What else? We can talk about miscarriages. We'll go into this in a lot more detail. I had a patient who had multiple miscarriages, DNCs. They had multiple surgeries done to the reproductive organs, and she was actually in a school building that flooded all the time, and there was toxic mold everywhere in that building. So if you're having constant miscarriages time and time again, and your doctors are like, I don't know really what's going on, let's try IVF, let's do this, let's do that, maybe first address your environmental situation before you go and spend $20,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 on trying to get pregnant. Because on top of that, if you do get pregnant and you are in a moldy environment, there are certain molds. Yes, it'll trigger the miscarriage, but it can actually trigger congenital malformations as well. So your baby will be born potentially with deformities, or it could be a very toxic baby because what mom's exposed to up to about 100 days prior to conception gets pushed into baby. So Just some other things to think about. Make sure that you check the house first. It doesn't cost much to run the test to analyze it, but if you're having recurring miscarriages or your doctor's completely stumped, maybe another sign that we're dealing with some mold toxicity. The other thing is, on top of that, infertility. So can't get pregnant, can't keep it. Those types of things can also roll into mold toxicity. For men are like, I'm just really tired, but then all of a sudden they have zero sex drive, like nothing. They're like, I don't know what's going on. I can't get it going, for lack of better words or lack of better phrasing. Can't get it going. Don't have the pep in their step, and they are decreasing muscle mass quite regularly and quite severely, to the point of almost looking like they're cachexic, where they just don't have the appetite to eat, and their muscle is just wasting away on them. Okay. Other problems, this is what happened to me, the low T, but then also the gut problems. I had some very serious irritable bowel syndrome, turned into IBD as well. And then there was a time, and I'll tell you the story afterwards, but there was a time where we were in a house in Oakmont in Pennsylvania, which, go figure, the house is right by the river. So I'm sure that thing flooded multiple times. Basement was disgusting. Like, it was pretty bad. It was a beautiful house. Don't get me wrong. We wouldn't live in a slum. However, it left a lot to be desired. And the house was built many, many years ago, and this would be something else we'll talk about, but it doesn't matter how old the home is whenever it comes to mold. So anyways, I was having real bad digestive issues, couldn't understand what was going on. I was just doing like straight chiropractic at that time, running my office, and then all of a sudden brain fog hit me, and my gut started just being horrible. I'm like, what in the world is going on? Turns out there's mold in the house. And this is my first exposure that I was aware of to mold toxicity and how it impacted my health. So this is why I build all this, and this is why I take it very, very, very seriously. And I will fight tooth and nail with anybody suffering with mold toxicity to get this stuff figured out and solved. Okay, so gut issues, rashes, unexplained rashes, whether it's on the cheek with a child, you can have rashing on the back of the arms. I've had rashing on the hands, blistering. One of my really good friends, a doc that I coach with, his wife had horrific full body, like blood-colored rashing the whole way across her body due to mold exposure in a home that they had moved into in a brand new build. It's a brand new home. And this is when these things started happening with her. Okay, so again, the rashing, unexplained anything can typically be directed right to mold toxicity. All right. And that's the last one here too that I'm bringing up just right now. If you've gone to every single medical doctor, specialist, etc., and they just keep pushing you around to the point where they basically just tell you it's in your head, you're kind of crazy, etc., good sign that there's mold toxicity involved. And this is also why I call this the number one home wreckers, because usually one spouse will feel worse than the other. My experience, it's 100% of the time one feels it, the other one doesn't. Another example, I had a patient just bought a new home to them, moved in, and within a couple months had left facial nerve paralysis. His face was just drooping, couldn't really speak, couldn't formulate words, and was completely zapped. That was due to mold toxicity in the home that then expressed a hidden Lyme infection that he had from many, many years back from an old tick bite, and mold was the cause for it. Wife feels nothing. Just is totally fine, totally peachy, just wants to help and love and support her husband. That's basically it. So if you don't have a strong relationship and you're thrown into the mold realm, there can be a lot of serious stuff that takes place, both emotionally, physically, because you'll slowly start dividing, because the husband will be like, hey, you went to all of these specialists, they said there's nothing wrong, so it has to be in your head. They said it was in your head, just take your medication and shut up. But the wife usually, or even sometimes the husband, but the wife will be like, no, I know that something is wrong, and I know I have to keep digging, but I just don't know where to go. Again, if you're listening to this and you're in that boat, stop now and get a mold test. Start talking to your husband or your wife about getting a mold test and figuring out if that's something that you are suffering with, because it's very, very, very common for you. Okay, for everyone. All right. Another thing that we talk about with mold, I brought it up a couple times throughout this. It has nothing to do with how old your home is. It has nothing at all to do with how old your home is. If your home is brand new or if your home is 1,000 years old, doesn't matter. Now, in a 1,000-year-old home, Is there a higher likelihood? Probably. If there's been a leak or if there's been many, many floods that have taken place or many roofs replaced, of course, older homes can have a higher risk rate of having mold in them. But brand new homes, especially now, they build them haphazardly. I mean, any new build, unless you're paying for like a custom build, a lot of new builds just get rushed through. And then they're exposed for a long period of time to all the elements. And then they seal them up to make sure that they're just airtight. But what they don't realize, if they trap moisture inside of there, it's going to condensate. It's going to cause more moisture to take place. And the heating and the cooling is going to cause that condensation to actually implant itself on the wood and try to go through that and either eat the OBS, so eat the wood frame structure from the outside. It's going to permeate through the drywall, situate itself there, and it's going to cause mold to take place. So whether it is my buddy that, him and his wife got hit with that, or if I have another patient in Ohio that dealt with this, and it was I think their house was brand new when I met them. When I started working with them, I think it was about brand new, and then they started dealing with some rashing. She started dealing with some rashing on her hands, and that was also a sign of mold toxicity. And we did everything we could. Her hands cleared up real nice, and then change of seasons took place, and then all of a sudden, boom, mold started coming out, expressing itself. Went to Florida for a while, for a couple weeks or so. Her hands went completely back to normal, went back into the house, and boom, again, just felt absolutely awful. And I've seen this happen time and time again, from whether it's skin rashes or miscarriages, or when you're pregnant and then you lose, like a more of a late term miscarriage as well. I've had a patient's wife have twins and lose one of the twins because they were in a moldy environment. So there's nothing off limits whenever it comes to mold. And I think that's really I think it's one of the most important things to truly realize, is that this stuff can do absolutely everything. Everything. Like when people are like, what does mold do? What doesn't it do? What doesn't it do? It's a much shorter list when you say, what doesn't this stuff do? Okay. Now, how to actually analyze for mold in the house. And this is where I get into many debates, many debates. And I get in debates and I yell about different mold specialist companies. And if somebody's coming into your house and they're using old school spore trap analysis, where they set a pool in the center of the room and they just let the mold supposedly fly into that mold trap, and then they try to grow it on a petri dish to figure out what it is, it's not going to be an accurate test. It's a good start if you want to do that, and if you want to pay a lot of money for somebody to do that and give you a crappy report, go for it. But when we're talking about what's actually effective, what the gold standard is and needs to be, 100% has to be an ERMI type test. The ERMI score, we'll talk about that, but it's the direct sample analysis. So when my patients do this stuff in their house, they're going to be taking a Swiffer cloth and just swiping everything to make sure that, whether it's the vents, the door jambs, to make sure that they're getting as much mold on that Swiffer as they can. And then the lab does a DNA-based analysis to see what type of mold is actually there. Okay. When you look at the mold report compared to that test, compared to the spore trap sample, spore trap is just, God, it's awful. I get mad every time somebody sends me one of those things. And they know it. My patients know it. And it's just like, hey, I had a specialist out and they said that I needed to do this one because they didn't trust the ERMI test. Well, the ERMI is just a score, okay? ERMI is the water damaged molds minus the common indoor molds, and you get the sum of logs, and it tells you like, hey, is your home habitable or is it not? And then it also breaks down what species of mold that's actually in your home to make sure that you know if you've got like a black mold in there, if you've got an aspergillus, a penicillium, if you've got cladosporium. It breaks all of those down there for you instead of just saying like the spore trap samples, just says aspergillus penicillium like family under one category. And then if you look at the ERMI test, like there's like 20 different types of aspergillus and penicillium based molds. Seriously, it drives me nuts. So if you're going to properly do it, proper testing, make sure that you can go to envirobiomics.com. You can call us if you want to, 412-828-6000, and we can send you out an ERMI test. We just use the EnviroBiomics site. But, if you're too lazy to do it yourself, just let us do it. Just let us know, and we can send one out to you. But that way you get an accurate analysis as to whether or not your house is good and healthy. Now, on top of that, you'll get what's called a Hurts Me score, which is like, how bad does this hurt me? It could be pretty bad. So it's at the top 5 most deadly molds that you can have in your home. And then what it does, it gives you another score. It says like, hey, get the hell out, or you're okay, or you should be okay. Even though you have mold, address it, remediate it, but it shouldn't be at a deadly rate unless you have a weakened immune system, which would then also in turn be caused from mold exposure. Okay. So proper testing is really important for that. All right. Causes of mold. What causes this stuff? All right. Now that we're talking about it, we've got to figure out what the heck the cause is. It's what we do. It's like functional medicine for the home, right? You got to figure out what that cause is. So we brought up brand new home. Is your home built too tight where it doesn't have any room for air to pass through to be able to blow, cool and regulate the behind the wall atmosphere? Okay. Is it too tight? Is it open too long during the building process? So if your house is being built through the wintertime, you're pretty much guaranteed to deal with some mold at some point, because it's not like they're going through and drying out the lumber before they seal it up. They just want to get that house built, done, finished with, and on to the next one. So that's just a good analysis. If it's taking that long to build a home, hedge your bets. You might, unless you're living in like Arizona or California where the weather's like always beautiful. I think in Arizona we've had maybe like a whole week this entire year, 7 days of rain. That's it. So it makes it really easy to build. So if it takes a little longer, like in a location like here, that's totally fine. But if you're in like Pittsburgh, you're in Michigan, you're in Maine, and your house has taken a year, 2 years to build, you're going through all 4 seasons, chances are you're going to have some mold that's going to accumulate if you're not too careful, right? So make sure that you're aware of that. Leak in the roof, it's another really standard one. I had a guy that did an exhaust vent from a bathroom that went up through the roof and never got around to sealing it. And sure enough, moisture came in and it caused mold to grow from the entire ceiling down, and it was dropping down on their daughter, which gave her some serious health issues. Gallbladder, they were trying to take her gallbladder out because it was so inflamed. Again, it was just due to a leak in the roof. The other one, obvious leak in the basement, the wall, the cinder blocks are either pulling apart. If you see some effervescence or some bubbling coming off of the cinder block, then that's showing that there's a lot of moisture coming through. So you want to make sure that you seal that off to make sure that no moisture is getting through those blocks into your house. And then another thing that's going to just run side tangent with that, say that you're running a dehumidifier in that basement just to try to keep things at a normal rate. The dehumidifier is a treatment of a symptom, right? It's not going to fix the cause of the water rushing in through the wall. But if you're running the dehumidifier and it's draining like all day long, or if you're constantly having to empty this thing out, you have a serious moisture problem in the basement. You're going to grow mold. And like I said with the spore trap sample, if you're allowing water to travel into the air, all right, it's coming through the block and into the air. What about the water that's going to travel up the block and go into wood or the ceiling, or what's going to happen before it gets to that dehumidifier? Okay. So we have to understand that dehumidifier is not a cure-all. It's good for treating a symptom of having a leaky home. But whenever it comes to actually addressing why the mold's coming through, we have to make sure we trace it back to the cause, figure out what's wrong with the foundation. And just saying that, just figuring out what's wrong with the foundation is kind of a big deal. We want to make sure that if your foundation is off, if it's wrong, that you're getting that fixed sooner rather than later, so that way your house doesn't have any foundation shifting that takes place. Okay. So say that you don't have the obvious ones. You don't have a hole blasted out in the middle of your living room, letting water in. You don't have a hole in the ceiling. Don't have a hole in the basement. What else can happen? Well, pretty easy. You can have leaking in the pipes. All right. So say you have some plumbing that you figured that you could do because you did a how-to video on YouTube, and you're trying to figure out, hey, I want to cut some cost here, and I want to do the pipe myself. Plumbing and electricity, 2 things I'll never do myself. Plumbing especially because I know about how severe it could be, except I did change a fixture thing on the toilet, and that's how much I know about it. A fixture thing, the flusher, whatever that's called. Replaced one of those. Not very good at it, but hey, it's finished, it's done, it's not leaking, so got that going for me. So anyways, if you have a leak in a pipe, it could be due to pipes that are rusted. We're in the home buying process right now. And one of the things here is if your pressure gauge is turned up, it could power wash the inside of the pipes and actually cause it to burst somewhere throughout the pipes. So you have to make sure that the pressure is right. If you have hard water or calcification or something of that nature. It can weaken the structural integrity. If you use Drano too much, it can weaken the structural integrity of that plastic, those U-bends in the piping, which can cause leaking, whether it's right there underneath the sink or somewhere further within the walls. So these are all things that, again, to be aware of. It could be a leak very easily, or if you're trying to do a reno project yourself and you accidentally hit a pipe and you don't realize it, you seal it all up and you're good to go. And by good to go, I mean you're good to grow mold. I even had a friend of mine who's, I believe it was their kitchen cabinets. There was a leak behind the kitchen cabinets because they did a reno back there. And then when they renovated the kitchen faucet, they never blocked it. So water still kept coming through, and they lost their health. And they're actually in a different location now because they're like, screw this, I'm out. And this was a house in Arizona. So a lot of people say, hey, Arizona, there's no way you can grow mold. Yeah, you can. If you make a perfect environment for it, it can absolutely grow here. Okay. So what do we do whenever it comes to how to properly test this stuff? We talked about the ERMI test, which is the test that you're able to run for the home. Okay, ERMI test is really good, again, because it's direct swab analysis. It's not the stand it in the middle of the room and hope that the mold comes in there. Even though mold's heavy, it's going to fall out of the air, hit into the carpet. If you want to laugh, or maybe not laugh, but if you want to look into this a little bit, something that was really interesting that I was researching, because again, I was getting into a lot of arguments with these mold specialists. And for those of you not watching, I did air quotation specialists, and they did a pre and a post test with the spore trap analysis. So pulling them in the middle of the room just allowed for air to circulate and go through and get captured and grow mold. And then they went through and they rubbed on the carpet and dislodged a whole bunch of mold. I think there was like a 400 times higher. Don't quote me on that, but if you look at the research, there was a huge increase in mold that was found just by swiping the carpet. Because again, mold's heavy, it's going to drop down, deposit itself in on the carpet. That's also why it's really good to either have hardwood floors or make sure you're swapping out your carpet. Make sure you keep it clean. Have a HEPA vacuum cleaner. Make sure that you're not tracking in wet footprints up the stairs, all around, as I'm like dreading we're going to be replacing carpet when we go into the house. So, so the upstairs is going to have carpet on it, but mainly because we have 2 kids and they're kind of accident prone. So carpet's a soft falling ground for them. But anyways, make sure you keep up with it. Have the HEPA vacuum so that way you're not depositing mold spores down. Okay. What else? So how to actually do it in yourself? You could do what's called a mycotoxin test. It's a urinalysis test where you use some urine, you trap it in the morning, you send out the sample, and then we wait and get the results back. And what that does, there's 2 different companies that we can use. One is called Vibrant America. The other one is Great Plains Laboratory. The reason I'm saying this is there's a lot of docs out there that will run these. You don't necessarily have to come to me. If you want to, we have the test very easy to get. It's very easy for you to get through us. All you got to do is call. But those 2 tests, what they're going to do is test, when we have mold in our body, it can come out and you want to challenge that before you do it. So some sort of like a charcoal-based supplement. We use another product called Biotoxin Binder, which helps to bind some of the stuff out and pull some of the stuff out into the bloodstream. And what it's going to do is give you more of an accurate representation of what type of mold is in the body. Mold loves to hide in the tissues. It loves to hide in fat. It loves to hide in the brain. When we detox mold, sometimes we'll have people that will get like eye goo that will come out of their eyes for the first like week or 2 as we're detoxing the stuff out. This is how potent this stuff can be. But anyways, proper testing, make sure you do that mycotox test so we see what mycotoxins you are being exposed to. You're usually going to see some correlation to what your symptoms are and what those mycotoxins are going to be. And if you have somebody that, can read the test like myself, we can kind of put those pieces together. Another test you can do is called an oats test or an organic acids test. And what that's going to do is test every single one of your organ systems in your body from your detoxification pathways. Some gut markers are going to be on there if you have bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, your amino acids, your B vitamin. That's all going to be written out on this organic acids test. Now that one's it's a lot more in depth than just the mycotoxins, but the reason that sometimes people do both is because it's like, all right, listen, we've got these mycotoxins, but how are these actually impacting your body? And so the oats test is going to be the easiest to say like, okay, you've got this over here, these organ systems are failing due to these molds. Let's get these out of the body. And in the process, we can do symptom patch repair, where we're trying to treat some certain things as we're going through our protocol. And turnaround time too for these tests are usually pretty quick. The ERMI test can be 3 days, can be 1 day, can be 7 days. We usually do 3, just quick turnaround time. And then the organic acids, and then the mycotoxin usually take about 2-3 weeks or so to get back. And in the process, we just have you bind the whole time if you suspect that you have mold, because it's not going to hurt you. So what do we do here? So this is a prime example here. So what do you do? So we talk about mold, and I don't want this to be like an overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I was told that every home has mold and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's about 50% of homes in America have water damage to them. 50%, that's a lot. And you don't want to be taking out a $200, $300, $500, $1 million loan on a home that has mold in it, because then you're going to be paying for your home, but you're also going to be paying your medical bills due to the home that you took a loan out for. So when you go into a home, what do? So obviously you go through your home inspections, make sure things are good, make sure things are clear. And I'll tell you about our home inspection process here as well. Kind of weird in a way. There's some spiritual stuff that we'll talk about on a later podcast. I'll get my wife in here to go over this with us. But we were in a process of looking at this house. We randomly found it. We drove past it, thought it was too far. And then we went back with our realtor. He showed us and he was like, oh, shoot, this is the house that we looked at. We thought it was too far. It's not really. It's actually perfect. And so we were good to go. We came back just to get some measurements, did the home inspection and stuff. And the inspector was like, hey, they just flooded the bathroom. We're like, what? So we went in the garage and we saw like water stains coming in through the bathroom. We're like, oh, no. So it's coming down through the bathroom floor down into the garage. I mean, obviously I can just rip out the drywall. Not obviously, I could rip out the drywall and then replace it and then be good to go. But so what did we do? We had to get a mold inspector to come out, and mold inspector did a thermal analysis, moisture analysis, did a spore trap sample test. I'm laughing as I'm saying, don't do it. It's just it's their gold standard. And then on top of that, we're going to be running an ERMI test on that house as well, just to, again, stack the information for us. Now, if you're in that home buying process, make sure that you absolutely get a mold person in there. Now, I've also realized too, when you have homeowners insurance, I know through Geico at least, it does actually cover mold, which I thought was fantastic. So if we do somehow down the line have some sort of mold exposure, mold growth that does take place in the house, we have an emergency contingency plan where our insurance will actually help us to, repair and fix up whatever it is that's in our house. So before moving into a home that you're going to purchase or a place that you're going to rent is really easy. Run the ERMI test before you even freaking go in there. Okay, boom, 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 wipe it, send it out, and be like, okay, we're good to go. If there's mold in the home that you're renting, legally they are required to clean it for you, because they have to be able to give you a habitable, like a safe habitat to live in, a safe place to live in. So that way you're able to have a safe place to live in. So that way you're able to not breathe in mold, not get sick, etc. If you're purchasing, then same thing. Have a mold guy come out and do a visual inspection, or sometimes you can find a mold specialist who will be able to run an ERMI test on the place too, which will also help. It will also help you out. Okay. So what else do we do here? I'm talking about a lot. I know I'm trying to talk about as much as I possibly can, because this topic is just so overwhelming. There's a lot of information that's out there. There's a lot of people who are starting to get into the mold field, even functional medicine. A lot of people are starting to learn about this stuff, because the only time that you don't get results in functional medicine, in my opinion, is when we're encountering mold and we haven't tested for it yet. Okay, so if you're like, no, I don't have mold. I swear I don't have mold. I've never had mold. I never had any exposure, blah, 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 blah. And say we're 3 months down the line, I'm like, nah, you're not progressing the way that you're supposed to. Test mold, 100% positive. Every time I test mold, I've been right up until this date. And I've been doing this for a long time. Long time. All right, so here's another question that I see. And I'll ask this as well to people. And people sometimes think that I've got like 10 heads on as I'm asking this, but it's really important. What organs can be removed due to mold toxicity? Which ones? Gallbladder is the top one. All right, because gallbladder, you'll get, and this, I actually had this, so you can get gallbladder referral sign where your right shoulder blade is just on fire all day, every day. It's like, mold will bog down it gets stored in that gallbladder. So you'll get gallstones. If gallstones aren't properly cleared and released out of the body, what's going to happen is you're going to accumulate those stones. It's going to get inflamed. If it gets inflamed and you go to a standard doc, they're going to do surgery, rip out the gallbladder, and say that you're good to go. Okay. Now, if you've already had that removed, please, please, please be taking some sort of bile salt type supplementation so that you can actually break down, digest, and emulsify fats. Otherwise, your hormones are going to tank because you need fats for that. Your nervous system tissue is going to tank because you need fats for that as well. Everything across the board, everything. Your brain needs fat. I mean, everything requires that stuff. So if you can't break it down and absorb fat anymore because you got your gallbladder taken out, you're going to be up, that creek if you don't get it supplemented in. And that's a lifelong thing. You'll always have to take that, always, unless they come up with some weird gallbladder replacement 15, 20 years down the line where they just artificially replace a gallbladder, which would be super freaky. All right, other things. Portions of the intestines. So if you've had like ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel disease, Crohn's, those types of things, and your digestive tract is like just horrifically inflamed, they can try to remove a portion of the colon. I had one patient that had that happen 4 years ago now. And then I had another one who just had massive bowel inflammation, and I saved him from getting it taken out. It was right after they did their own mold renovation. They absorbed a whole bunch of toxins. He went in, thought his appendix was bursting. The doc's like, I have no idea what's going on. Your small intestine is just inflamed, and there's stones in your small intestines. They're like, I don't know what's happening. Here are these drugs. Go home and see if it happens again. All right, so if you don't know any better, that can absolutely happen. Reproductive system. So that you can have full hysterectomies because you can get hot flashes and stuff. You can have horrible PMS symptoms due to mold toxicity. So a lot of people get their reproductive organs removed. Men, you can have testicular surgery. If you have testicular cancer, it could be due to mold, so you can have those removed. So it can absolutely have an impact on the reproductive function of men and women. If we have thyroid, so I'm actually working with a patient right now. I had a thyroid goiter that was huge on the side of the neck. And through working with me, removing some infections that she had in her gut, as well as removing the mold toxicity that she had in her body, she's been able to successfully shrink down. Every single month that we meet, it's smaller and smaller and smaller. So she's getting better and better. But most people would have like a thyroid issue or antibodies against a thyroid or thyroid cancer, and they just get the whole thing removed. Well, if that happens, why did you need to get that removed to begin with? Are you still currently being exposed to mold? So this is where functional medicine differs from standard medical practices. We want to understand why. Say you are going to get that surgery, and say that you need it to save your life. You need to get your gallbladder removed, or you need to get your thyroid removed because it's about to explode inside you, or something crazy like that. Reproductive organs because it's going to explode. Something crazy. I'm not saying that surgery isn't, there's not a time or place for surgery, because there is. It's to save your life, but also figure out afterwards, what do you need to do to supplement in what you got taken out, whether it's your thyroid, your gallbladder, your intestines, or something else. And then on top of that, what caused those organs to fail to begin with? Because if those ones failed and you take those out, then that toxicity is only going to have a few more organs that go through as well before you have to get those taken out, right? So just be aware of these things. We're always trying to find the underlying cause. Same thing with your health, same thing with your house, same thing with mold. We'll always find the cause, because that's where the gold is finding that cause. And I'm not talking about financially, because financially, it's a burden for you guys if you've had mold toxicity in terms of rebuilding your home, if you have a lot of renovations to do, but it'll save you further down the line. So we're talking about spending more upfront to fix the underlying cause of the problem, be able to prosper, be super healthy, super happy, versus, 10, 15, 20 years of just miserable health and everything failing you. Well, you could have had that solved just by figuring out the mold crisis, right? What does mold actually do to you? So from a simplistic standpoint, one of the guys I'm coaching with here, actually hoping to bring him on next year as well to help out, he was like, I heard that mold weakens your immune system, and it absolutely does. So when we're talking about mold, just from the most simplistic standpoint, mold exposure is going to weaken your immune system. Okay, people can have allergies, they can have asthma, breathing problems, they can have insomnia, they can have digestive issues, chronic yeast overgrowth, the thrush tongue, the white tongue. So many health conditions, cancers can happen due to mold toxicity, breast cancer, colon cancer, you name it. lymphomas, like multiple myelomas, everything out there can have a link back to a weakened immune system. Weakened immune system, finding the cause can be due to mold toxicity. Then what does it do? It damages the organs, whether it's your brain, okay? It can damage your brain, it can damage your liver, your kidneys, your gallbladder. You name it, it's going to try to store it somewhere, so that way it's going to damage those organs while you're being exposed to it. And then there are a lot of molds that are carcinogenic, which means that they actually cause the cancer. So that's another thing that it can do. I've seen it huge with linking into infertility as well. It's part of my fertility triad. You're being toxic, and you're toxic due to whether it's heavy metal toxicity or mold exposure, some other form of chemicals that you've been exposed to, be that mold or be that heavy metals. And then it can cause gut problems, IBS, IBD. We already talked about that. Irritability. It's another thing that mold can express itself like. You can be super irritable all the time when you're in your own home. Chemical sensitivities. So being hypersensitive to things like spray foam. I have multiple patients who can't go around spray foam, and it's not the spray foam's fault. Yeah, it's toxic, but it's due to mold causing the multiple chemical sensitivities. It can cause dizziness. Dizziness is one of the quickest things that it can cause. Quick side note, tangent story on that. I remember going out to Ohio and adjusting. And when I was adjusting over there, we rented an event center, and I was down in the basement of in Sugar Creek. That's a beautiful town too. If you guys have never been to Sugar Creek, Ohio, it's beautiful. It's awesome there. But we were down in the basement and we were adjusting. And I remember being in this room. We had my wife there, my son was there, and I'm just making it through the day. And I'm getting dizzy and dizzy and dizzy. And I'm really good at fasting, where I can fast all day long if I need to, just drink water. I'm really good at that. But I was getting massively dizzy, and I couldn't remember who was on the schedule, and all I wanted to do was close down and basically like hide away and lick my wounds, be like, what the heck happened? And then found out the next week that there was mold. They had to do a full mold demo to that building. And I believe I'm quoting that right. I know the person who set it up was like, yep, they found that. I was like, man, I'm so dizzy. Like, I feel bad for my patients too, coming in there to get adjusted in a moldy environment. I just didn't know. It wasn't something that I had tested because it was just a new venue and we thought we were good to go. So that can cause some dizziness, okay? Lack of focus. So if you've got kids and they're doing horrible in school, it could be mold at the home, or it can be like a lot of other cases that I see, mold in the school environment, which is also very difficult to fight because schools, for whatever reason, don't like to take care of their buildings. They just like to let them just barely squeak by, okay? If you're a woman, if you've got hot flashes, again, dealing with menopausal, or if you're just premenopausal and you're having hot flashes back and forth, could be due to mold exposure. Rashes, like I've talked about, rashes like you've never seen before, or if something popped out. I've had guys with rashes on their eyebrows. I've had rashing all around the outline of the hairline. I've had women with that as well, where chunks of hair will actually physically fall out of their head. Hair loss is another thing that it can do. So those can all be tied into mold exposure as well. And then here's something as well. If someone's like, hey, I was exposed to mold 15, 20 years back in a dorm room that I was in. I knew it had mold, or a frat house, or I know my parents' house growing up had mold, whatever the case may be on that. If you don't actively remove that from your body, you will carry around that mold exposure until you do. Okay? It's not just something where you get out of the environment and the mold just says like, hey, we can release ourselves. We can get out of the body now. It'll wait until a time for you that your immune system gets weak, and then boom, it lets itself out. We see this a lot of times with pregnancy. Women will either struggle to get pregnant or they'll finally get pregnant. And if they're in that moldy environment, they'll give birth, and that birth is a stress. It's good stress, but it's a stress on the body. And that stress will be like, oh my gosh, I've never been able to bounce back since my kid. I've got chronic fatigue. I've got postpartum. I've got all these other symptoms that are going on. And a lot of the times, quite honestly, it's due to mold exposing itself. And then you'll have a super fussy kid. And if you're breastfeeding the kid, you can pass those mycotoxins onto the kid as well, which is a huge debate. Do I breastfeed with mycotoxins being present in the milk? What do I do? That's a whole different ball game. And if you're a patient of mine, you know what we would do with that. But just some things to ultimately be able to think about there. Okay. So what do we do now? Now we've talked about the testing. We talked about the environment. If you can't clean up the environment, get out of the environment. You're not going to heal until you do. All these things that we're about to tell you, they help. But if you're still being exposed to it, you're just, detoxing and retoxing at the same time, with the same breath even. So you can take the binders, the biotoxin binder. You can do some charcoal. You can do some chlorophyll. Those are some really easy, normal ones. Bentonite clay is another one that's everywhere that you can use these things. You just have to make sure that you're dosing them properly. If you dose them too hard or you do them the wrong time, your body can have some really harsh detox symptoms. And if you don't have a functional medicine doc coaching you through this, or naturopathic, what I do, naturopathic health expert, if you don't have somebody like that lining that up for you, it can be very difficult to get through that process, and you want to quit after a week because you overdid it. Okay, it's not like hey, if a little bit's good, then more is better, and the most is the best. It's not how it works. A little bit goes a long way, and you chip away at it, so that way you work with your body's tolerance. Okay. The other thing you can do, one of my favorite flushes to do, this would be a time where I would warrant that, is you do what's called the Andreas Moritz liver and gallbladder flush. Okay, if you need that, contact our office, again, 412-828-6000, and we can send you over a document on how to do it. It's very easy. It's very cheap to be able to do it, and it flushes everything out of the body. You can do it still if you don't have a gallbladder. You're still going to have some stones that come out, and you'd probably be even more in need of doing this flush if you have had your gallbladder removed. There's very few times where you can't do it. I never really suggest it while people are pregnant. I don't really suggest it while people are breastfeeding. Some people may disagree with that. I just don't like ever detoxing when we're working with children, for the mom as well as the child. So we usually want to go around that. But other than that, it's pretty darn good, pretty darn safe for you. Okay. It's one thing you can do. You get liver stones, you get gallstones that went up in the liver, intrahepatic stones. Pretty neat. That everyone that does it, it's invasive because you're going to do coffee enemas with that as well. But the way that you feel afterwards is remarkable. It's absolutely phenomenal how good you feel after you get all of that stuff out of the body. The other thing too is that mold can cause a hypometabolism where you can't lose body fat like at all. You just stubborn weight, you fad diet all the time. You can't lose it. Sometimes when you do the liver and gallbladder flush, you get all those toxins out and your body starts to lose that weight because the liver can now detox the way that it was designed to, and it's not being bogged down. The way that I think about the liver is kind of like an air filter, whether it's in your house or in your car. If we're not removing the toxins or the buildup, or not cleaning or not replacing that filter, okay, just stop talking about cleaning. We're not going to replace your liver. But if you're not cleaning that, it's going to get bogged down. And the more that you try to throw toxins into that dirty filter, the more things are just going to get bogged down. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have spillover. So you have phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Phase 1, in between, you have these really, really toxic metabolites that came from something previously. And then that's going to get recirculated back into the bloodstream. If you do that, you can have horrible detox symptoms from that. Detox symptoms. It's retox symptoms is what you're basically getting. So it's really important to know how to properly do those things. Okay. So talk about those: liver and gallbladder flush. We got the biotoxin binder. Eat clean. All right. I mean, for goodness sakes, things to eat, things to avoid. Foods. You're going to hate me for this. Coffee. All right. Coffee is one of the most highly contaminated food sources out there, drink sources out there, especially like your Starbucks. And Starbucks, I don't care if you don't like me for this because I'm a little bit sensitive on it because you ruined one of my buddy's offices and allowed for black mold to grow in there, and you're not holding yourself accountable. So screw you, Starbucks. So coffee beans can have really high mold, and they can have a really high pesticide concentration. So quite honestly, the only coffee that I'll drink is Bulletproof brand, mainly because Dave Asprey, he's awesome. If you haven't listened to any of his stuff, please do. Please read his books. The guy's super knowledgeable. But his beans have a clean guarantee. So no mold, no pesticide guaranteed. And you can actually taste the difference in the coffee beans, where it's not harsh, it's not acidic, doesn't burn, doesn't give you acid reflux, and also doesn't make you rush to the bathroom right afterwards to have a bowel movement because you didn't just pour yourself a cup of pesticide and mold. So that's one thing. Dried vine fruit is another one. Wine, right? Grapes can have high mold concentration. And then your foods that have high histamine concentration, so like Avocados can sometimes do it, but more often than not, your berries, so like blueberries, raspberries, those types of things, they mold very easily, so they can have a high mycotoxin concentration in them. Peanuts, so peanut butter, peanut oil can have high mycotoxin concentration. Those are just some of the things that I would say, hey, if you're worried about consuming mold, cut those out. Even cereals can have a high concentration in them. Then the other thing too is if you're suspicious of mold toxicity, things that will make it grow is going to be your processed sugar. You're basically going to have to push towards going more keto so that you're not feeding the mold, because it is a fungus. Can make you grow yeast quite easily. So any sugars, any breads, pastas, those types of things, it can cause a high spike in additional symptoms due to the sugar concentration that you're adding into the body. So again, when you work with a functional medicine doc like myself or naturopathic health expert like myself, you're able to basically sit down and analyze these things and really put a plan together. This could be one of the worst processes of your life, or it could be one of the best processes of your life. But the sooner you get after it, the sooner you can start healing. It can take some time to heal as well. You have to have patience with yourself and patience with your body. But the bottom line is you have to test and analyze, is it the home? Is it the office? I mean, you can have it in the car. You can do a tap test on the car if you're transporting things back and forth. There's so much that goes into this process, which is why it's so big now in functional medicine, because doctors are missing it. I know that they're missing it to a certain extent. They closed down, I think it was a west wing of a hospital, I think like 3 years ago, due to mold toxicity. It was just flying through the vents. So how many people died due to mold toxicity in the hospital? So they are aware of it. We need to be aware of it. And again, like I always say, we have to be our own health advocate. And we know something is wrong with our bodies. It's not functioning. And I used to tell my wife, my brain isn't functioning at 100%. That was my story. I had an iron trap for brain. When I worked down in Houston, man, I remembered everyone's name, their kids' names, their birthdays, what they did last weekend, what they did 3 years ago, their favorite food, their favorite color. I mean, everything. I had it down pat. When I went to Pittsburgh, we moved up to Pittsburgh, and I opened my business in Oakmont, and we had that property that we had in Oakmont that we were renting from. My brain was just poop. I couldn't remember my name half the time. I had no energy. I couldn't work the schedule. I would forget what I had just talked about with a patient. It was incredibly overwhelming. And again, being a high achiever like myself, it was just one thing after another. And I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. And then we found that out. We worked on mold. And so what I used on myself is what I'm using on my patients. And even now, I'm way better. I wish I knew what I knew now back then, so that way I would have been able to heal even faster like I'm doing for my patients. So if you need help or you need support in this area, or maybe this is like a relative that is always complaining about these weird health issues, these weird symptoms that take place and nobody can put their finger on it, it doesn't hurt to test. It doesn't hurt to give us a call and see if, maybe it is mold. So that way you can have a starting point to build a foundation of health on, because you can't be healthy if you're being exposed to mold. So hopefully this episode is very helpful to you guys and gals out there today. I really appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time.